In today's podcast, we have a special guest, Tim, who decided to visit all of the states in the United States of America. Why does he want to do that? And what has he discovered about the US after spending so much time there? We'll find out on this episode of
Après Anglais with Reza, Craig and Tim.
Hi, I'm Reza.
And my name's Craig.
And I'm Tim.
And with more than 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. So, Tim, it's lovely to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm not doing too badly. This is my first ever proper in-person podcast recording.
Yeah, it's really nice to have you here in the same flat. On the other side of the desk, I can see Reza over there on my right. I can see Tim on my left. This is exciting. Welcome to the podcast.
And what did you mean by your first ever in-person podcast? Can you clarify that?
Well, I've probably done several hundred remote podcasts. So I record on Skype or Zoom or StreamYard with other people in different places in the world, but not generally in a lovely air-conditioned studio here in Spain, in Craig Towers.
Studio might be stretching the definition a bit too far, but thanks for the compliment. And quickly tell the listeners what your live stream is about and where they can find it.
Well, I do two live streams. One is called Oh No, Not Another Live Show, and that's on YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn as well. And we interview people from a variety of backgrounds. We even had Craig on the show once.
Yes, so if you want to listen to that, go over to Tim's YouTube channel. And of course, links will be in the show notes at inglespodcast.com/488. But we're here today to talk about Tim and a special project he is in the middle of. But before that, where's your accent from?
Well, that's an interesting question because the trouble is, it's probably the same with Spanish people. Everybody thinks that their accent is the normal one. But I grew up in Watford, which is just northwest of London. And my parents were from southeast London. So the UK is such a diverse place that accents can vary from one side of London to the other.
Yeah, but I definitely recognise your accent as a London accent. The first time I met you, I thought, yeah, this guy is from quite near where I grew up in North London.
I'm mainly a London accent.
You know, as soon as you said Watford, that helped me. I thought, yeah, I recognise that accent, not just as London, but kind of Watford, because I've got a good friend from Bushy Heath.
Ah, yeah.
You know, Bushy Heath. And I thought,
Nice,
your accent's very, very, very similar to his.
So, Tim, you decided to do a project in which you wanted to visit all of the states in the United States of America. What motivated you to take on and do that project?
Well, the funny thing is that I'd started to already visit a lot of US states. And the background from that is that I kept going to this same conference on the west coast of the US.
What kind of conferences?
Mainly social media or podcasting. And the thing is that I don't like night flights. I really hate sleeping on planes. So what you can do is you can take morning flights from somewhere like New York or Boston and fly over to Heathrow as a day trip. So I was already breaking it up. I'd fly from somewhere like San Diego to New York. And then I kept meeting people in the middle of the US. And I'm like, well, I'll just go and visit them on the way. So I'd already kind of just naturally got up to about 15 states. And on Twitter, I saw this hashtag 50 by 50 states. And it was mainly people driving camper vans around the US and the like, going around visiting all. And I was like 45 at the time, something like that.
45 years old?
Yeah. So I thought, well, I can do this. It'll give me an incentive to visit. And then I started like just going to places. I didn't actually do all 50 states by 50. I am now officially 50 and COVID put paid to my pants.
Oh, COVID interrupted
Yes.
the project.
Yes.
So, but you are 50 now. So you've just said that there are 50 states in the US. How many have you visited so far?
49.
Wow.
I've only got one left.
you nearly got there, nearly.
And which state have you not visited?
Hawaii. So that's a little island in the Pacific, which is miles away from all the other states.
But in theory, if you visited Hawaii before your 51st birthday, wouldn't that be a 50 by 50?
Well, that's my thinking.
I've got a question for you. What about these territories which are kind of controlled by the United States, but they're not part of the states? What about Puerto Rico? And what about Guam? Isn't that another one? There's a few islands which the Americans control, but they don't belong to any state. How does that work out? Do you know?
There's a few countries that America control, but we won't go into that.
Well, I'm obviously not counting them as states. They are disenfranchised in a way, certainly Puerto Rico.
What does disenfranchised mean?
As in, like, they haven't got the rights to influence their affairs by voting.
In government.
Yeah, in government. Yeah, so at some point they may become states, but the problem is that because of the US political situation with Republicans and Democrats, they don't like adding new territories because they'll think, oh, Puerto Rico will vote Democrat and that will unbalance everything. So it's unlikely that anytime soon they're going to be actually added in.
And if you did want to visit all the territories, I don't know if I was you, I would go to Guantanamo. I might not go there.
Yeah,
you might not get out so
I'm not
easy.
sure anybody voluntarily goes there. Yeah.
That's in Cuba, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cuba, but it's American territory. Yeah.
Ah,
In
right.
Cuba.
So 49 states you visited. From those 49, which of those were particularly memorable? I'm sure some stand out more than others. What are your favourites?
Well, I will say California because that's the one that probably... But then California is enormous and there's so much to it.
Is California the biggest one? I know Texas is big as well. Which one's the biggest?
Well, it depends what you mean by big.
Okay.
The biggest area-wise is Alaska.
Alaska, okay.
Yeah, the biggest population-wise, I think, is California.
So apart from California, do any other states stand out as being particularly interesting?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, like, Alaska is a fantastically beautiful state to visit, though obviously you have to be careful what time of year you go because it's so far north. Unless you really like the cold and or the northern lights, I wouldn't go to Alaska anytime that's probably before May and after sort of October time.
Are there any states, and with the risk of offending people who might be from there, but I've got to ask, are there any states which are kind of unmemorable? I mean, I've only been to a couple of states in the USA myself, but like, if you would ask me to say something about Delaware, I was like, I don't know.
It's funny you have picked my least favourable state in Delaware, but it's unfair in a way because I've only visited Wilmington, Delaware, which is the biggest city in Delaware, the easiest one to get to, and yeah, it's fantastically forgettable, slightly sketchy.
Fantastically forgettable. I like that.
Well, the weird thing about Wilmington in Delaware is the architecture is very like kind of Midlands UK style. So it's not even, you go to most US cities, there's a very definite US style of architecture, depending where you are. But Delaware is like it's built in a state that's kind of like one of these Midlands Northern English towns. So it's not even novelty. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And but funny enough, New Hampshire, even though I've heard that there's some fantastic scenery in New Hampshire, where I visited in New Hampshire was pretty boring as well. So everything shut at like 5 o'clock. So it wasn't fun.
Can you remember if any accents that you heard in different states were particularly difficult to understand? Because I know that the accents vary. The southern states have a particularly musical accent. Did you obviously notice different accents? Did you find any particularly difficult for you as a native speaker?
Generally speaking, the southern accents were harder to understand. Mm-hmm. But what I've always found interesting is that a lot of places they couldn't understand what I was saying. So in the south especially, it was more difficult for people to understand what I was saying.
As a native speaker, that's incredible. And I know the listeners are going to be thinking, what? But Tim's an English, he's from England. Why wouldn't they understand him?
Yeah, well, I'm guessing it's like Spanish speakers going to Mexico or Argentina or somewhere. I mean, there are probably places in rural Argentina where a Spanish speaker might struggle to be understood and vice versa. But yeah, it's surprising. The weirdest thing was in the Midwest, so somewhere like Kansas or Missouri, I could understand them very well, but they could understand me. So I don't know how that works. It's not like a mutual. You'd expect you can understand me, I can understand you, but it was very much, in some places, I could completely understand what they were saying, but they could not understand what I was saying.
Maybe because they hadn't met many British English speakers, because you've traveled quite a lot. You go to conferences in America, in North America. So you're used to the American accent also online. You speak to people with American accents. Someone working in a restaurant in the middle of North Carolina or South Carolina, maybe they wouldn't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was Charlotte, which I think is in North Carolina, where I probably had the hardest time talking to people, being understood. I don't know what's special about Charlotte, but...
Can you do a South Carolina accent or a North Carolina accent?
I don't know. All I can do is like a kind of generic Southern accent, but I don't know if that's... Is that right?
It sounds a bit like stupid. So.
It's just stupid more than anything.
Well, we don't want to offend anyone out there, so we better stop doing accents.
Well, can I just ask one more thing about accents? I've always had a real fascination with Louisiana.
Yeah.
Because that seems to me one of the most interesting of all the states. Have they got a peculiar accent down there? And have they got any strange vocabulary there that you can remember, strange words?
They have, but yeah, there is a very specific Louisiana kind of, at least New Orleans is where I went in Louisiana. I mean, this is the thing. I've only really been to one place in each of these states, so I'm not going to be able to say I'm the expert, but yeah, there's definitely a Louisiana accent. Though Mississippi's similar, and that's right next door, so...
Did you notice a French influence in New Orleans?
Not as much as you'd think, actually. There are people who speak French in New Orleans, but it wasn't a massive... I didn't really notice a big French influence there, per se, apart from the architecture, obviously.
So you've obviously spent quite a bit of time in the US. What do you like and dislike about American culture? And you're not allowed to say it depends.
I did say before the show, dear listener, that I would answer it depends. What do I like? I was thinking, because I amongst my other things, I have actually got a YouTube travel channel that I've created, but I haven't done a video for ages because I've been too busy traveling. Go figure.
Yeah.
And I was thinking like top 10 things I don't like about the US video. So I've been thinking about that. But they're all like weird minor things, really.
Such as?
Turn on right. That's my biggest...
turning... If you're in a car, obviously you do a lot of driving when you're there. You can turn right even if the traffic light is red. Is that correct?
Yes. And as a pedestrian, it means any time you see the green light change, there's this chance that somebody will turn their car into you.
And hit you.
Yeah. Well, sometimes... It's not usually... Because they usually are stopped. But... what happens often is you'll start walking and then this car will come right in front of you as you're walking across the crossing, and that is very disconcerting and it feels really dangerous. Well, another weird, very minor thing is bathroom stalls or toilet stalls. They have this enormous gap. So I don't know if you're like in a cubicle in a restroom or bathroom.
A public toilet.
Public toilet, yeah. Uh-huh. And like you usually have just like a door and it's like this kind of thing. I don't know why I'm waving my arms around because you're doing an audio podcast.
Yeah, for the listener, we're getting a visual demonstration of a US
but
toilet.
They've got an enormous gap. It's kind of up to the level of this desk. It wouldn't be uncommon, and like you're like you can see kind of. It's just very strange. That's another.
So you can see what people are actually doing their business inside the cubicle.
Well, I mean, there is a door, but it's like really. There's a massive gap at the bottom of the door and a massive gap at the top of the door, and it's just bizarre.
Okay, so that's a couple of things you're not really keen on. What are the positive side?
I think the biggest thing that I've taken away, whether this is a positive or not, is how diverse US culture is. We think because they all speak the same language, they're all the same. And there is this generic idea of what the US is like in the rest of the world, but they are very different state by state. Obviously, somewhere like Louisiana is not that different from Mississippi because they're right next door to each other. But Boston is fantastic. Boston and Massachusetts fantastically different from, say, North Carolina. It's fantastically different from California. Fantastically different from Alaska. And you can find something for everybody somewhere in the US. And they are kind of privileged in the fact that they can just go within their same country and find whatever they want, really. There is somewhere in the US that most suits most people. So I think that's the biggest advantage of the US, really.
What do you think about, I always get back to the same topic, I know. What do you think about food?
You're going to ask about food,
you know it, yeah. Food. I mean, the French, who are very proud of their cuisine, of course, they like to have a go at the Americans. And they say they're quite right, actually, when they say, yeah, you a fantastic country. You can't even make one decent cheese. True. America. Well, how come a country like America can't make one decent cheese when France has about 5,000 types? How can that be?
Yeah, well, that's another thing on my list, actually. Cheese in the US is terrible.
You see? Yeah, told you the French are right. Not one decent one.
No, really expensive. They might have brie, but it'll be like $10 or something ridiculously expensive there. It's not as bad as it was, but it's still pretty terrible.
There must be good cheese for sale in some of these farmers markets that are locally produced and locally made. I'm sure a bit like a brewery, a local.
Well, the thing is that it's similar to the old ways of the Common Agricultural Policy in that they defend American producers of cheese, and they've got these massive caves in Missouri full of cheese, apparently. Literally, they've got these huge cabins full of cheese. They don't know what to do because they buy it all. And they've got big import duties on European cheeses and the like. So, but in terms of food more generally, there are places with good food in the US, but the general level of food in the US isn't great. But there are some places, like if you ever get the chance to go to sort of Kansas City barbecue or something like that, and Texas is very good for barbecue food as well. Some of the Chicago pizzas and New York pizza and stuff. So, yeah, there is good food in the US, but you have to hunt it out. It's not like you can just be a tourist. If you're a tourist in Times Square, you're going to experience some of the worst food you've ever eaten, probably.
Let's talk about drink. I've yet to find an American beer that pleases me. I do like a nice beer. Can you help me out? Can you recommend any?
There is good beer in the US, but it tends to be sort of locally brewed.
Microbreweries.
Yeah. And that's especially true in the middle of the country because it's cheaper because they're in the middle of nowhere for them to just brew the beer there rather than shipping barrels of Budweiser into the middle of nowhere.
So your advice would be perhaps keep away from the mass-produced beer like Budweiser and focus on microbreweries, locally produced beer.
Yeah, well, I mean, these you go to them and like you've never heard of any of the beers because they just brew it themselves, and a lot of them keep changing. So they talk about things like porters and stouts, and I'm like, what does all this mean? And it's a wheat beer. They'll describe what the beer is, but it won't be a brand you've ever heard of because they've just brewed it there from that particular kind of thing. So. There are some parts of it, like San Diego's got a very good brewing culture. And, yeah, some of the Midwest as well. Like, even places like Wichita in the middle of the US have got very good, like, everywhere does its own beers. So it's kind of an interesting place to visit in that regard.
I have to say, just to redress the balance, I don't want to seem all pro-European. Name me anybody a decent French beer. They don't do good beer, do they, in France? So, the Americans could quite easily say that. A good French beer, is there such a thing? I've never come across a good French beer, ever.
Can you hear that sound? All those emails from our French listeners coming in to complain that they do have good French beer.
Oh, I'd like to.
So we got rid of the US listeners by saying their food's rubbish. We got rid of the French listeners by saying their beer's rubbish.
But they both do really good wine.
Yeah.
And I like American wine. I've had really good American wine, really good French wine. Have I saved some listeners there? But I think British and Irish, we might do better in beer, I think.
So let's try and offend some Spanish speakers because we do have a lot of Spanish listeners to the podcast. Where would you say are the most welcoming states if a Spanish-speaking person wanted to visit the US?
Well, you're basically looking west and south usually. So California, obviously all of California, but more LA, San Diego, more that area. New Mexico, somewhere like Santa Fe. I would say Albuquerque, but that's got a reputation of being quite sketchy. But Santa Fe is a lovely...
What do you mean by sketchy?
Dangerous.
Yeah.
But the trouble is Americans often describe a place as sketchy when it's just that they don't feel safe walking around, but they don't feel safe walking anywhere. They tend to drive everywhere to everywhere. So.
Have you ever felt in danger or seen any violence when you were travelling around?
There have been places that I have thought I should get out of here quickly, but not... actually, Albany in New York, I felt a little bit... Not the whole city, just there was one street I went on and I felt, I don't feel safe here. Mm-hmm. But in general, no. But then I am a large 6 foot tall man, so it's kind of like I'm probably not the best bellwether of personal security in the US.
You've just given me an idea by saying the word Albany. Honestly, this is spontaneous, listeners. Capital of New York State?
Yeah.
Let's test you. Capitals of states. Let's go for it. Capital of California?
Sacramento.
Oh, well done. Not Los Angeles, not San Francisco. Sacramento.
Capital of Alaska?
Is Juneau, I think.
Not Anchorage?
No, it's not Anchorage. I think it's Juneau.
One final question, Tim. At a time as we're recording this podcast, I've noticed that many Americans are actually leaving the US and emigrating to Europe. I don't know if you've noticed that, Reza, but I've seen a lot and heard a lot of Americans coming over here to make a new life. Could you, Tim, move to the US and live there permanently?
For a long time, I thought I could, but I've kind of changed my mind on that.
Why?
It's not that the US is a terrible place to live or do stuff. It's just, I kind of think there are other places that are more interesting to me. Somewhere like Mexico might be, because Mexico is easier to emigrate to.
And cheaper to live in.
A lot cheaper. Well, the price is a lot of the issue. But there is, I mean, as an English speaker who doesn't speak any other language, obviously America appeals. But then you've got Canada, but Canada's too cold most of the time. So, yeah, I think there are other places in the world that are going to be better for an English speaker to go to than the US. It's kind of gone from the pinnacle of the world of the place everybody wants to go to now it's, yeah, it wouldn't be terrible to move to the US. I mean, if somebody offered me a job with £150,000 a week or something, yeah, I'd be happy to go to the US. Yeah. But it's not somewhere I would pick as a place to move to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And you mentioned Mexico. You're going there soon. Which part of Mexico are you going to visit?
I'm going to Puerto Vallarta, which I'm hopefully pronouncing correctly, which is on the...
West Coast, I think you said.
West Coast, yeah.
Yeah. So if anyone's listening from there, we do have lots of Mexican listeners. Get in touch with us. And if you want to say hi to Tim when he's traveling around there.
I'm staying at an all-inclusive resort there for about 4 days, and it'd be good to have an excuse to get out and actually meet some people. I like meeting people in places I go to.
Okay, well, there you have it. Get in touch with us, and we'll pass your message on to Tim. Tim, thanks so much for keeping us company and giving us your information on the 49, soon-to-be 50 states.
Yeah, February, I'm going to be going to Hawaii.
Thanks very much, Tim, and enjoy your trip to the United States of Mexico.
Yes. I'll have to restrain myself not to put state 1, state 2, because I don't want to visit every Mexican state as well. So thank you so much for having me on the show, by the way.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
And now it's your turn, dear listener, to practice your English. Reza, how can people do that?
Well, our preferred method to hear from you is through an audio message. So why not record yourself using SpeakPipe? There's a link in the show notes. It's speakpipe.com/English podcast. Record yourself, but do remember, because a few people have been caught out, they didn't remember that there's a 90-second limit, so you get cut off after a minute and a half. But please do send us a voice message. That's our preferred method. But Craig, if people want to write, where can they email us?
Yes, if you want to record a voice message that's longer than 90 seconds, you can attach it to an email or just write to us. I'm Craig, Craig, at inglespodcast.com.
Or me, belfastreza at gmail.com.
And you can also reach out and contact us if you're interested in studying with us, because I have groups of conversational English learners if you want to practice and improve your fluency, your pronunciation, your vocabulary, and your general confidence when you need to have a conversation in English. Why not join one of our groups? Send me an email and I'll give you more information.
If you're interested in a one-to-one individual class, or perhaps a couple of people, you might like to get in touch with me. Just to remind you, my email is belfastreza at gmail.com.
And this podcast is sponsored in part by mansioningles.com. Visit the online store and see the products we have there for sale to improve your English level. Go to store.mansioningles.net. As
always, we'd like to thank the people who sponsor us through the Patreon scheme. That's Patreon. If you're interested, you can have a look at the link in the show notes, patreon.com/Inglespodcast. And what those people do is donate. It can be as little as $1.50 per month. And as a thank you for people who sign up to that, we give them access to audio transcriptions so that they can see all of the words in the podcast episodes.
Unfortunately, we don't have time to thank you individually by name, all of you who are supporting us on Patreon, but we would like to say hello and thank you to our most recent subscribers. Reza, who are they?
The most recent sponsors who've joined us are José Luis Muñoz Olivares, Beatriz Herbada, Juan Carlos Alumbreros Fresneda, Nicolás Beaupuits, and Felipe Martinez Alcala.
Thank you to you and to everybody who is supporting us on Patreon. We have no idea what we're going to be speaking about next week, but we do promise we'll be back next Sunday with another episode about something. So until then, it's goodbye from Tim.
Goodbye.
It's goodbye from Craig.
Goodbye.
And it's goodbye from Reza.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends. Have a lovely week. Until next time, goodbye. The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.